I'm Tiffany. I'm a grateful recovering heroin addict from St. Louis, Missouri. Whew. I'm honored to be here. And when I got the phone call from Tim, he asked me to speak. I was like, "You sure you got the right Tiffany?" Yes. Yeah, it's pretty surreal for me. For this dope fiend that was once so lost, prostitute, junkie, couldn't get out of bed without cooking my breakfast in a spoon. Wasn't able to be a mother to her children. I was not a good spouse to my then boyfriend. I stole from my family. And most importantly, I stole my mother's peace of mind. She couldn't sleep at night. She didn't know whether she was going to get the phone call in the morning that her daughter was dead. This program has saved my life. The people in these rooms have saved my life. My sponsor has saved my life, but most importantly, God has saved my life. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I show my gratitude by sponsoring other women in this program. I show my gratitude by taking care of my children the best that I can. I show my gratitude by getting up every day and going to work and being employable and just trying to be the best Tiffany that I can be. And I don't always do it very perfectly, I can tell you that. I get restless, irritable, and discontent. I rest on my laurels more often than not. But that's what sponsors are for, When I'm having one of those days or weeks, I finally come to my senses and I'm like, oh, maybe I should call Mo, And I call Mo, and all she has to say to me is, where were you at over 3 years ago? I want you to take just a second and meditate on that and think about where you came from, that tiny little crappy slum of an apartment you were, living in on the south side of St. Louis. The tricks you were having come in and out of that house, the dope you were shooting. Today you're a homeowner. You're a single mother who's able to care for your children without the help of a man. You're employable. You've held down a job for over 2 years. That's crazy. You have good credit. That's insane to me. You have a car. Just all these things. I have all these material possessions that I never thought I would have in a million years. But most importantly, I have peace of mind today. I have a higher power that I do absolutely rely on because, people will fail you every single time. We're just human, But it was those moments of my sobriety that, when I wanted to give up, that, the pain was so great that I didn't think I could go on, that I turned to God. And God told me, I got something better for you, Tiffany. He always said, I got something better for you. And, I thought that something better was going to be a man, or, money, all that, material crap or whatever, that outside stuff. But really what it was the love of myself, loving myself enough to keep on going, to show my children that, leading by example is simply just leading by example, being the best person you can be. I have a sobriety date of February 28th, 2015. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I did live in Austin, Texas for a little while. I don't know if any more of the Austin cats are here, but, I love Austin, so did a whole lot of partying down there when I lived there. But I grew up in your typical, alcoholic home. I never knew my biological father till later on in my life. So, growing up, the only dad I knew was an alcoholic stepfather. He never told me he loved me. He was always hitting my mom. He was always yelling at me. I was terrified of him, I was always walking around on eggshells in my house. I had 3 younger brothers. I was forced to grow up real fast. My parents, they were always partying when I was young, and eventually they got the divorce. And while they were going through the divorce, Mom decided to go off and do what she wanted to do. And I, had to take care of my brothers, and that's why I say I had to grow up kind of fast. I didn't get to do like typical teenage things that teenage girls get to do. I didn't get to go and hang out at the mall with all my friends. I had to like sneak out of my window at night to go and hang out with the boys or whatever, because I always had to take care of my brothers growing up. So I think in turn that just kind of where my downward spiral slowly started. Once I was kind of old enough to get a little bit of independence, I went crazy, and it starts with alcohol for me. It starts with pot, and then it slowly progresses. And, whenever I was 26 years old, somebody introduced me to heroin. And I hated heroin because I saw what it did to my best friend in high school. I used to sit there and cry to Michael and be like, please stop. Like, I'm watching this destroy you, and you're such an amazing person. You're my best friend. Why can't you just stop? And we're both bawling, our eyes out, and we're sobbing. And she's like, I can't stop. And I didn't understand it at the time. And then fast forward, 10 years later, here I am one night with one of my buddies, and we're coming down from our little crack binge, and he's like, I got some China White, you want to try it? I know you hate it, I know you saw what it did to Michaela, and you saw what it did to Lauren, and you saw what it did to Johnny, and, but, we're different, right? It's not going to happen to me. So I was like, yeah, come on, let's do it. And the light bulb went off, the light bulb absolutely went off, and I identify, I attend HA and I also attend AA. My sponsor's like old school AA. And I'm so grateful for that woman. And I'm so grateful I'm an alcoholic for that reason, because she's able to sponsor me. She's real big on singleness to purpose. And I agree with her wholeheartedly on that. I didn't always, but I finally connected the dots in that aspect. But the light bulb went off for me whenever I first drank that alcohol when I was 14. And the light bulb went off for me when I was 26 years old, and I snorted that line of China White. And from there, man, it was a downward spiral for real. Because within the first year of being a heroin addict, I had caught my first felony case down on the riverfront. Those arches that St. Louis has? Yeah, St. Louis Arch. That's where I was. And me and my boyfriend at the time were trying to make some money. Our hustle was stealing copper. So we decided to be real smart and go down to one of the barges and steal some of this copper. But it was connected to this electrical, a light. And we're like, oh, we'll just cut it. Nobody will know. But unbeknownst to us, somebody was working on the barge. And they called the police. And that's how I caught my first case. And, my boyfriend at the time was such a raging heroin addict, just like me, and he was lying to the cops all the way to jail. Like, it wasn't me, officer, because he's from Brooklyn, New York, so he's got that Brooklyn accent. And he was like, it was these other guys. They came by, they cut the wire, and they took off that way. And I was like, I'm over here like this. Oh, my God, I just couldn't believe that he was continuing to lie and lie and lie. And the cop's like, I know I'm beat, right? So I go to jail for the first time, like, for real, outside of a traffic ticket. And I think they're going to let me out the next day. But they didn't. And whenever that cell door slammed shut in the Justice Center in St. Louis, man, things kind of got real for me at that point. But that wasn't enough to make me stop, I got out of that workhouse, we call it the workhouse, down there on Hall Street. And 6 days later, I caught another charge, shooting up dope in a parking lot down on South Grand. And of all things, I got caught by an undercover off-duty homicide detective from St. Louis Police Department. He was picking up his dog from the vet. And if that's not God, I don't know what it is. So I went back to the workhouse. I went back to the exact same cell block that I had just left 6 days prior. And you got a problem whenever your cellmates and the other women on the cell block are like, why are you back here already? Like, you just left. And I'm like, I don't know, man, I don't know. And I remember this woman in there, one of the old South Side, hoes, from the hostro. And, I loved her. She was awesome, right? And I used to joke with her. It's funny because I used to joke with her, and I'd be like, I want to be one of the South Side hoes, I was so young. And she was, we would talk, and we would have, heart-to-hearts. And she was, an old-school junkie. And she was in there because she was a junkie. And I remember talking to her and being like, I'm going to get out of here, and I'm not going to use ever again, And she's like, oh, baby, you're not done. You have many years ahead of you left. She's like, I'm sorry to tell you that, but you're not done. And I was like, yeah, right, I'm done, And she was right, man. I got out, and I was accepted into a St. Louis City drug court. And today, I remain forever grateful for that program because I truly believe, in my heart of hearts, if I had not entered into that program, I would not have found the rooms when I did. I believe I'd be dead today. And, I may not have gotten sober and stayed sober in that program, but I did make it through that program successfully. I was going to meetings. I was going to NA at the time. I was going to meetings, and I was doing the deal, but I didn't work any steps. And I need to emphasize that. I had not worked the 12 steps. I had a sponsor, I had women that I networked with, and I went to meetings. I had a home group, but I did not understand the concept of service at that time because I hadn't worked the 12 steps. And I really didn't know I didn't have that God concept down either. So, I continued on, and, eventually I stayed in a relationship that I didn't want to let go of, with that heroin addict from Brooklyn, and I ended up getting pregnant while I was sober, and by the grace of God, I did not use while I was pregnant with my daughter, thank the Lord, but I remember 3 weeks after bringing her home, I looked at my boyfriend, at her father, and I said, go get some dope. Because I had stopped going to meetings. I had given up on the program at that time. And he went and got dope, And I remember cooking up that shot. And I did that shot. And then I looked down at this beautiful being that I had created, that God had blessed me with. And I just cried. Because I knew where that relapse was going to take me. I had no idea how bad it was going to get, but it got real bad. And within a year, I started turning tricks. That was one of those I nevers, I was never going to turn tricks, just like I was never going to stick a needle in my arm. Just like I was never going to steal from my family. I was never going to take my kid to the dope set. I did all those things, and then some. In this big book, on page 52, they have the promises of not working this program. And for years, I experienced the promises of not working this program. And it states right here in the third paragraph, or second paragraph, I guess, we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. And that was me. And I'm sure a lot of you in this room can relate to that. Being that prey to misery and depression, I don't experience depression in recovery. After I worked those 12 steps and had a spiritual awakening, I don't feel depressed. Not for long, We all have our bad days. Having trouble with personal relationships, that was a really big one for me. I still have yet to be in a healthy relationship with a man. I've been single for pretty much this entire time I've been sober. I have 2 children, and they both have different fathers. And, I eventually broke up with the guy from Brooklyn because I knew that he was inconstitutionally incapable of being honest with himself. And I pray for him still to this day. He is not part of his daughter's life. He's got the biggest heart in the world. Most of us heroin addicts do, but he just cannot be honest with himself. He knows that if he ever gets sober, he can absolutely be part of Izzy's life. But I met another guy, right? And this one was a recovering heroin addict. And I had 2 weeks sober, and he had like 3 months. And I met him in the rooms of Heroin Anonymous at the I Don't Want to Live Like This No More meeting of Heroin Anonymous on Friday nights, which is now my home group. And he was chairing the meeting, and I walked in, and I swear it was like the heavens parted. You know, and he was sharing, right? And I was like, oh my God, he's so sexy. He has so many wonderful things to say about recovery, you know. And that was it, you know. It's like we locked eyes and it was electric, right? That was my first relationship with a guy in the program. And I had no idea that it really wasn't a God thing. It was really actually a very toxic, self-will run riot thing. But at the time, it was a God thing, right? So we moved in with each other the next day. I'm not exaggerating. And I think we relapsed maybe about a year after that. Well, I was relapsing. I mean, I had 30 days sober. That poor guy was like white knuckling it and holding on real tight. He should have been in codependence or Al-Anon, I guess, or whatever, because he was going to keep me sober, you know. And man, that was a crazy time. It really was. And we finally both relapsed together at one point, and then decided we would have a baby because that was going to fix everything. That was going to keep us sober. It was going to be our new higher power, since we were both each other's higher powers, and we were obviously failing each other miserably. So we'll have a little boy, and back up a little bit. I have a little brother. His name was Austin, and he died from this disease. He died of a heroin overdose about a month before I got pregnant with my son. And so I do truly believe that my son was given to me for a reason. My brother was 24 years old, and he wasn't a heroin addict like I was, we called him Bunyan because he was like big, like Paul Bunyan, right? This kid towered over me, and he was my little brother, and him and I had a connection. He was the only brother I had that would go to meetings with me, and because I have 3 younger siblings, and they're all boys, and they're all addicts. We're all addicts, and Austin was the only one that would like try with me. He would try to go to meetings. He would try to get clean, and when he died, it broke my heart, He called me the Tuesday before he died and left me a message. I didn't answer the phone because I was using. I had to go get dope. I was on the grind, I was a prostitute. I had to make my dope money. I had to turn these tricks and get this money so I could get high. And Austin called, and I bypassed his call. And then I listened to his message later, and he wanted to go to a meeting. And then the next call I got was from my mom, and she said that Austin passed away of a heroin overdose this morning. And I beat myself up over that for a long time. I gave my little brother's eulogy at his funeral high. And I patted myself on the back because I made his dad cry, His dad never cried, but I made Robbie cry, and that was like, I prided myself in that. But I gave my little brother's eulogy high, and he died of a heroin overdose. And he just dabbled. He was not a heroin addict like I was. And I don't understand why God took him and not me sometimes. Today, I know that I was left here for a purpose. And I strongly believe it was to help other heroin addicts to achieve sobriety and to be the best mother I can to my kids. So I had another baby, and I named him David Austin. And, I tried so hard to stay sober during that pregnancy, and I was kind of in and out of the program, and I think I was definitely lying to my fellows about my clean time. And, I think like 30 days before I had him, I freaked out, and I was like, I got to get sober because the DFS is going to take my kids, And, I turned tricks when I was pregnant with my son, and these are things that I was really ashamed of when I came in and got sober again. And I remember doing my fifth step with Mo, and I remember saying, I'm so ashamed of like this turning tricks and doing this with my son inside me and all these things. And she's like, honey, she looked me straight in my eyes and she said, you're ashamed of this now, but these are going to become some of your best assets because you are going to be able to help other women through the same thing. And someday you will be able to get up in front of a room full of men and women and share that. And I didn't believe her. Here I am sharing it today. That is one of the 9 Seth promises. We will see how our experience can benefit others. So yeah, I was being a big old hoe whenever I was pregnant with my son. And I was the best damn hoe on the south side of St. Louis. Yes, I was. At least I thought so. My days, I had my son, and I did. I sobered up that 30 days before, and whenever he was born, he had no drugs in his system. And but he had Subutex, I couldn't just go cold turkey. And so I did have to watch him detox. And that was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through as a mother, I mean, trust me, going through a lot of hard things right now as a mother. But that was really tough. I sat in that NICU and I cried and cried and cried watching my son go through tremors after he ate, But thank God, they detoxed him successfully and he didn't have to get any methadone or anything like that. So I took him home. Well, my mom took him home and I got him back 30 days later. But because they had found drugs in my system from way before. But anyway, I ended up going back home, saying I was going to stay sober, and the insanity kicked in again. The obsession kicked in again, and I started using again, and so did my boyfriend. And we had the kids, and we were living in this crappy little duplex down on the south side. It was so dirty. It was tiny, and basically, my bottom was, my day would go somewhat like this. I would wake up in the morning, and no matter what, and I guess this was kind of how I justified, like, still having my kids and being a mom, like, I would get up, and I would still care for my kids, but I would care for them just enough, right? So I'd get up, no matter how dope sick I was, or at least before I got too dope sick, and I would change their diapers, feed them breakfast, and then we would go back into my daughter's bedroom, and I would stick Frozen on for them to watch over and over and over and over and over all day, while I sat in the same room with them and proceeded to like post my ads on Backpage, Craigslist, however I could get tricks to come to the house, I would. And my ex would lay in bed dope sick until I, brought him dope. And that's how our days went. I was turning tricks with my kids in the basement. My ex would take the kids and go wait in the basement, and I would turn a trick in my child's bed. That's how sick I got. That's how bad things got for me. It got to the point where I could not even look myself in the mirror anymore. I could not look my boyfriend in the face. Like, I hated him. I hated him because he allowed me to turn the tricks. I hated him because he would beg me to stop turning tricks, and then he would turn around and beg me to do it again because he needed dope. I hated myself for what I was doing to my kids. One day, I literally hit my knees and I said, God, I can't do this anymore. Like, I started looking at my daughter and my son, and I was like, man, if they end up like me, if my daughter ends up being a prostitute on the south side in some crappy little slum of an apartment, addicted to heroin, then I have totally failed her. And if my son ends up being one of these Johns who's coming in here to, to do whatever he wants to me, or ends up being one of these men that treats women like scum. I failed him. And the only way I know that I can't fail these kids is by getting sober. And it wasn't just for my kids. It was for me too. Like, for the first time ever. Because I'd been trying to get sober for like almost 10 years at that point. And this was the first time that I really wanted it, because I could not live like that no more. So, I said this prayer, and, nothing happened immediately, right? I was on probation at the time. One day, shortly after the prayer, I guess, I was on my way to go see my PO. And I used to make my daughter pee in a cup because I needed clean urine, right? And I would put that urine where it needed to be, and I would walk to the bus stop. On this particular visit to the PO, I was walking to the bus stop where the urine needed to be, and the urine bottle broke. And I immediately knew that it was God. And I looked up at the sky, and I said, thank you. Like, I don't have to lie anymore. I was actually relieved in that moment. And I think that for me, at that moment, I had worked step one, because I knew that I was powerless and my life was unmanageable, and I had surrendered to my heroin addiction. And I went to my PO's office, who didn't drop me all the time, by the way, right? So I went there, and I walk in, and she had a urine cup sitting on her desk. And I was like, once again, this is God. And I looked at her, and I was like, I'm dirty for heroin, and I really want help. I don't want to do this anymore. And it wasn't even a big deal, Like, how about that? You just be honest with people around you, and things kind of fall into place, And she respected me for it, too, And I ended up, calling my own treatment center and setting it up myself. She didn't even violate me. So I packed up my bags, and I went to a place called Queen of Peace over there in Central West End in St. Louis. And I had to take my kids with me. Couldn't leave them with the ex because, well, he's now my ex, but I couldn't leave him with the boyfriend because he cannot take care of kids when he's dope sick. And we were both going to get sober. And so the kids came with me, and I got to treatment. And of course, we all use that first day, right? We're going to treatment. I'm gonna get high one more again, right? So that's what I did. And the next day, I woke up, and I've never been so sick in my life. Like, this was the worst detox I think I've ever been through, ever. And I was there was fluids coming out of every orifice in my body. My children were terrified. And I had the staff coming in and out of my room telling me, you can't be here like this. This is not a social detox facility. And I was like, what do you want me to do? Like, I couldn't even talk to them. I was so sick, and they knew it. And they were like, you need to go to the ER. I'm like, what am I going to do with my kids? They're like, you can send them to crisis nursery. So I had to send my children off to this nursery. They had no idea what was going on. My babies, they were terrified. And I'm laying in bed, and right before I leave, the staff member comes in. Her name was Miss Mimi. And, this woman, I got really close to her while I was in treatment. And to this day, I'm forever grateful for her, because she was such a force in my life at that time and my children's lives. And she came in there, and I was laying there. I couldn't even hold up my head, and she prayed over my children first, and then she came over to me. Then she leaned over, and she whispered in my ear, and she said, Tiffany, 16 years ago, I was laying exactly where you're laying. She's like, I couldn't lift up my head. I was so dope sick. She said, by the grace of God, I have not had a detox for 16 years. Come on through, Tiff. Just come on through. And I came on through, I went, I detoxed, came back to treatment, finished treatment, went home, immediately got a sponsor. And this time, I'm not going to sit here and say it was different, because there wasn't really anything totally different, except that I didn't care about the guy anymore. I really wanted this for myself. This time, I even called him before I left treatment. I said, look, I love you. I hope you stay sober. I'm coming home. We're going to be together still, obviously, but I got to get sober. Like, you know, and I set boundaries, and he set boundaries. And I went home, and everything was really good. You know, I got a sponsor, and I immediately started working steps with her. She's not my sponsor today because I started, you know, obviously was going to a lot of meetings and stuff, and I kept seeing this woman named Mo, you know, this little old lady, little like firecracker, you know, like she's probably like about, I don't know, she comes up to here on me, short, little, blonde, little flight attendant lady, and she looks like little Betty Crocker, right? But then you start talking to her, and no, she's a little firecracker. She's sassy. Do not cross her path, right? Especially don't mess with her girls. She's that lady. And I kept hearing her speak, and the last time I heard her speak, she was speaking at this AA meeting, and she was talking about sponsorship, and she was talking about the 3 legacies. I'm like, what are the 3 legacies? You know, I have no idea what a 3 legacy sponsor is. And then she also was talking about how her sponsees had long-term sobriety, a majority of them. And I was like, man, that's it right there. Like, I've always been able to get clean and, you know, stay sober for 30, 60, 90 days, but I can't stay sober for a long period of time, you know. And I knew right then in that moment I had to have her as my sponsor. I was really interested in that 3 legacy thing. Nobody had ever taken me through the traditions before, you know, and I had only worked at the steps like one other time. And what's with these concepts? I have no idea what those were. So, you know, and it wasn't just that, man. Mo walks with such a grace and dignity that I had to have. You know, I did not respect myself. You know, I was that would come in the rooms and sleep with every dude that would even just look my way, you know. I did not have any love for myself. And I wanted what Mo had. So I asked her to sponsor me. And she's like, only if you'll go steady with me, because I don't do any temporary sponsoring. So I was like, okay, I'll go steady with you, Mo. So we got right to work. And, you know, I think I got through the 12 steps with Mo in about 10 months. And, you know, we did step 1. We go directly through the book. Oh my God, my 4th step. Man, my 4th step. Whenever I sat down to do my 4th step with her, because I was like worried, right? She gave me a week to write my 4th step out, because you know, we don't need to sit in our own crap, right? Like, so I wrote out this 4th step in a week, and it was like 22 pages long, like of like computer paper that was like that. And when I sat down with her, she was like, oh my God, like, this is so long. And I was like, well, I was afraid that you would send it back if it wasn't long enough. Like, I didn't want you to make me rewrite it. So we had to meet twice to do my 5th step, because I had so much stuff down. But man, I had so much crap, I had to get that out, you know. Step 1, I told you I did step 1, you know. Of course, we went through it in the book, but I knew that I was a heroin addict. I knew my life was unmanageable. Step 2 and 3, you know, I came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And then we're entirely ready to Step 3, came to believe, what is step 3? Yeah, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Thank you. Yeah, so step 2 and 3, man, that was a really, really, really big one for me this time. I knew, and Mo like emphasized early on, she's like, you need to have a God in your life, and it cannot be David, and it cannot be your, you know, kids. It cannot be anybody but God. You just got to know that there's a God, and it's not you, you know. And, you know, when I talk about God, I used to be one of those, like, you know, addicts in the room that would not say the God word, because I didn't want newcomers to be like, what the hell, man, this is a religious program, blah, blah, blah. Because I was that newcomer, you know, like, I didn't like that word. I hated that word. But when I say God today, it's a God of my own understanding, and that's all the newcomer needs to know right now. You know, this program is a spiritual program of action, and As long as you know that there is something greater than yourself and you are not God, then you are good to go. But, she was really adamant about me building that relationship with a God of my own understanding, and I did really early on, and I'm so grateful I did. Things were going really good with me and the boyfriend, but all of a sudden, things weren't going good with me and the boyfriend. I felt the boyfriend pulling away, and, if it were any other, if there were no kids involved, it wouldn't have been so serious, but there were kids involved, and I was newly sober, and one of the things that was on my fears list on that inventory was becoming a single mother. And so 6 months into, actually it was like right around my 6-month anniversary, which is one of my pivotal birthdays for me. That 6 months means so much to me. We split up suddenly. He stepped out of the relationship. It was very painful. It was very public. And I literally did not know what to do. I lost it, and I that night, one of my girls came and picked me up, and we went to a meeting, and I vomited. I vomited in that meeting, but I didn't know what else to do. I needed to grab onto the people in these rooms, or I was going to go use, because that's what Tiffany always did. Whenever stuff hit the fan in my life, I would go use, especially whenever my higher power didn't love me anymore, right? So, today, at that time, he wasn't my higher power anymore, and I chose to turn to the higher power of my understanding, which was God. And I got through that. And like I said, I thought that God had something better for me, which was another man, but it wasn't. Today, I stand here still sober. I think I had 3.5 years just the other day. And I am a homeowner. I'm employable. I have all those things that I told you about in the beginning of my talk. And I'm still single, and that's okay. And some days I get real on a pity pot about it. But today, I'm okay with it. There have been so many amazing things that have happened to me since I've gotten sober. I've gotten to take other women through this book, and that in itself is such a gift. My sponsees mean everything to me, and I love you because they keep me sober. I have one right now who's really struggling, and I know I feel her pain, man. I remember being that addict that kept coming in and out of the rooms over and over and over and recommitting. I had so many white key tags at one point that I was going to decorate my Christmas tree with them. Really, I was. But, thank God I haven't had to get another white key tag in over 3 years. And it's all from working these steps and taking action and taking suggestions from my sponsor. Whenever my ex and I split up, Mo was very adamant. She was like, "You are not going to go get under another man, because that's not going to work for you." As a matter of fact, in this big book, that sex inventory was huge for me. It was so huge for me. It says right here on page 69, we reviewed our own conduct over the years. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. And I really looked at that sex inventory. And, I thought that all these men had wronged me, especially those tricks, right? All those Johns. And I had to literally get from my head to my heart that I played a huge role in all that. Huge role, every relationship I had ever been in, I played a role. I was not innocent, I played a role in my ex leaving the way he did. I hurt him beyond belief, that could have been a very good relationship. It could have been potentially very healthy, but it wasn't. We were not in the right place to be healthy. I feel like if you haven't worked these 12 steps, how can you know what you stand for? How can you know what your principles are? How can you love yourself? So if you don't love yourself, how can you love another person? It's just that simple for me. And I did not understand that for years. Years I didn't understand that. I grew so much from that relationship with him and that breakup with him. I essentially found myself. And I actually told him that. I didn't get a response in that text message, but I did. I told him, I think it was on his 3-year birthday. I texted him and I said, happy birthday. And I'm so grateful for your sobriety. And I am, dude. He's a great father to his kids. I do not always agree with his principles or the things he does. And he definitely does things to still hurt me. But I don't think he does it directly to me. We are all sick in our own way. And like I said, we are all human. So what's important to me today is that my children have a father that is sober, and that is all that matters today. After we looked at our sex conduct and we looked at whether we arose that jealousy, suspicion, bitterness, or anger, and we looked at it on paper, it says, in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our sex life. Thank you. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. That's the relationship prayer. I had no idea there was a relationship prayer in the big book. Thanks, Mo. We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. Like I said, I haven't been in a relationship yet in recovery, but I definitely still have a sex inventory that I have to, try to live by. And it's not easy, man. It's just not easy. But I'm a hell of a lot better than I ever was before. And I respect myself today because of that sex inventory that I did, that thorough sex inventory that I did. What else did I want to read out of this book? How long have I been talking, guys? How much time do I have to? Okay, cool. Okay, this fellowship's absolutely amazing, the things it has given me. As far as the service work goes, I'm not able to be like the service guru in our fellowship back home. The way I give back is by sponsoring to the best of my abilities. I'm a single mom, and I don't get to be as active as I would really like to be, but I know that day will come for me someday. And I absolutely will do a lot more. Right here, it says on page 14 of Bill's story, this is a very powerful warning in our book. It says, my friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly, was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me? Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that, and it is just like that for us. Heroin addicts, nobody can work with another heroin addict like another heroin addict. I can't relate to anybody on that level. Whenever I first went to a Heroin Anonymous meeting, it was the second one in St. Louis ever, and in the past I had always done NA or AA, and I never truly felt that connection. But whenever I sat in that meeting of Heroin Anonymous for the first time, I felt like I was at home. I heard other heroin addicts talking about their struggles with heroin and their addiction and all the things that they had done, and it struck something in me. Every single one of us in that room had goosebumps that night. It was the most surreal feeling I've ever had. I will never forget that meeting. I will never forget the people that were in that room that night, and I will never forget some of the things that were shared that night. I'm forever grateful to this fellowship. And I am going to close with this. Life will take on new meaning to watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. That's all I got. Thank you.